Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Abilene People, where we talk to Abilene's most interesting people. And today we have a very interesting gentleman that's going to be introducing himself to many of us. I did not know you previously, sir. This is Rich Lyles.
That's correct.
You work for Texas Tech University in the, the Accelerator, Apex Accelerator program?
That is correct. Northwest Texas Apex Accelerator program. I'm the director of the program for the 130 counties of West Texas.
And so that is a program that helps people with government contracts relative to growing or sustaining their business. Is that a fair way to describe it?
That is describing it to a T. I may change some of our literature. That's a great description.
Hey, man, blind squirrel finds a nut. So you've been in Abilene a number of years. You worked here for Texas Tech in this kind of, I don't know if it's a niche kind of work, but none of that is really why you're here at the podcast. And we're going to get into that in a moment. But I thought I'd ask you first, you have a family?
I do, yes. My wife's here. She works in Wylie. I have a son who's a Las Vegas, Nevada Metropolitan Police officer, a couple of grandkids of his, and I have a daughter who just became a senior at Texas Tech as of this semester.
All right. So I'm just curious, for somebody who has a Las Vegas police officer son, is it true that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? Do you think that's true, Rich?
I think it's partially true.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Okay. So the reason you're here is because it's my understanding you intend to file to run for place 4 in the Abilene City Council, the place that's currently held by Brian Yates, who has announced he will not seek re-election, and you're going to go for that seat.
That is correct.
All right.
I plan to file for that seat and during the open filing period, and I will be running for that.
And that opening filing period, as we sit today, starts next week and runs for about a month.
That's correct. I believe it opens on the 14th of January.
So, Rich, I just want to ask you, I don't know, I'm just going to get at it this way. Why in the world would somebody want to run for city council?
Well, first of all, lived here for about 5.5 years, and I really deeply care about Abilene and the citizens thereof. And basically, I just want to, give back to the city, and I want to focus on some local issues and some things that are really near and dear to me, stuff like infrastructure improvement, stuff like manageable and sustainable growth, and items like addressing the inflationary issues of housing, things of that nature.
Well, now, I was going to talk to you about growth and planning and housing, and it sounds like to me the interview's over. It's really nice having you. Really nice having you.
Hey, well, thanks. Yeah.
So, all right, well, let's talk about all of that and a little bit more at the same time. What do you see as the primary responsibility for a city council, particularly one organized like Abilene, where although we have a mayor, it's really a city manager-run style of council? What would your role be?
Well, I think the main role of a city council here, you're passing city ordinances, you're approving a budget. I think one of the things that we need to do is take a look at that budget and really try to be the best stewards that we possibly can of that money. Not that the current folks are doing a really bad job.
Well, I was going to ask
right
you.
now.
Do you think that is there like any runaway expenditures you're concerned about presently?
Not that I've identified in the city budget. I haven't had a chance to really look at it, but we always want to be good stewards of that money. And my financial background that I have prior to getting into the government contracting world, and the analytical ability, financial background that I've had gives me an opportunity to really go through and analyze this stuff and take a look for areas where we could realize some savings. There probably are some. Every city government's run to a certain degree of there's certain amount of money that can be saved, or we can look at all the possibilities along that line. So I see the role as that, and also managing growth. Also ensuring public safety, and public safety is everything from police and fire to something really simple and basic like having sidewalks. For example, the places I've lived, most cities I've lived in have a lot of sidewalks. Abilene does not have that many sidewalks.
Yeah. Do you consider Abilene a walkable city, or do you think there's a lot to improve?
I think when it comes to that, there's a lot that can be improved in that. And that's where you want to go out and start to get kind of creative out of the box. You want to try to look at funding that's available, whether it's federal flow-through funding to the state that, that flows through to the local municipalities, or even private private funding through foundations and other organizations that will promote public safety. Yeah, you need to be kind of flexible on all of those.
How well versed are you in the recent concerns that citizens have had about the condition of the roads in Abilene?
I know that there is some concern on that. That is one of the basic things that I think it is one of the basic things that's a responsibility of local government, paving the roads. Now, where I live down just a little bit south of the mall, they recently did a paving project on Rebecca. Went through pretty fast. It took a road that was deteriorating and put it in really great shape. I drive around the city and I see a lot of places up in North Abilene where the roads are just in atrocious shape. So one of the things we really need to do is take a look at that infrastructure and see if we can find creative ways to finance those improvements.
Yeah, my wife teaches school at a school on the north side of town, and when we have a heavy rain, the car she had previously, we did not trust that car to not get flooded out, literally.
Ooh,
so
wow.
we recently got her in a new vehicle with a higher profile and more clearance, specifically because we don't trust the drainage in our city when a big rain comes. Have you noticed that, and does that register as a concern with you?
It does. One of the places that I've been where I noticed that after a real heavy rain is I was on the West Loop and I got off on Ambler. And right there at the West Loop and Ambler, right, as I'm going east on Ambler, I noticed that a lot of those streets, the residential streets there, at that time I was driving a Honda Accord, which sits about this far off the ground.
Yeah.
And I would not have made a right-hand turn to go down to some of those streets because I'd had wet feet.
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of I'm no expert on it, but I guess it's the plan that our city has for drainage to just water run down the streets in the case of a big flood. I mean, can we do better than that? What do you think?
We should be able to. I mean, take a look at the project that was done at Buffalo Gap. Now, the project that lasted probably 2.5 to 3 years, I kind of lost track of the time. It went a long, long time. But that particular project, if you look at the drainage that they put in, it's brand new, it's modern, it looks like it's adequate size. We've had some pretty good rains since that's gone in, and there has been no flooding in that area at all. So it's just a matter of increasing the capacity. And I'm not an engineer. I don't know what the mathematics of it are. But one of the things with Abilene they've always got to be cognizant of is just the general topography of the area. Water doesn't run off extremely fast. Just like years ago, I was working with a McAllen operation way down in South Texas. We had a little operation in Raymondville, which is about 40 miles north of McAllen. And if you've ever been down the valley, you know that floodplain of the Rio Grande, it is flat as you can possibly get. And we had a hurricane that came through there, Hurricane Dolly. It dumped 23 inches of rain in about 24 hours. And it took a good 2.5, 3 days for that water to run off because it was just so flat. Well, there's some areas in Abilene that have similar topography, maybe not quite as flat as that, but in those areas, that's where you're going to have to spend the majority of your time or money and effort actually getting adequate drainage in there. And it's probably going to be a fairly expensive project, but if you're a citizen that lives in that area, it's also going to be extremely important to you that you can get in and out of your house without having to worry about the water coming in through your doors when you're driving out of your driveway.
Yeah, so you mentioned you're not an engineer, but I do think you have a certain level of expertise relative to government and municipal relationship with funding, with the population. What are the biggest challenges from your chair for a city like Abilene to fully fund its budget? I'm sure you're aware that the city has, over the last many years, put fees onto our water bill.
I pay it every month.
Yeah, I mean, so what's up with that? And are you a fan of that kind of approach?
I'd have to dig into those individual fees and see exactly what they're going through. It all comes down to investment versus return. If you're investing $500,000 and you're getting $750,000 back in return, it's a great investment. If you're investing $500,000 and getting $480,000 back in return, is not a good investment. So that's the sort of thing that we kind of need to take a look at and make sure that those investments are right on those fees. And if they are, great. If they're not, then we need to take a look at changing that.
In your viewpoint, Rich, what role should city government play or maybe not play in economic development?
they need to, city government needs to ensure that economic development and growth is steady and not runaway. That's the very first thing. I mean, nobody wants to see an economy go backwards to actually degrade. I mean, if you get deflation, that's one of the worst things you can possibly have. But you also don't want to be in a growth situation where you have runaway inflation either. And one thing that I've seen is here recently is runaway inflation in the housing market. Well, for the rental housing market, the actual cost of purchasing homes doesn't look like it's changed an awful lot in the past year.
Is that because of the data centers?
It could very well, it probably has to be because of the number of construction workers that are in here right now for the building phase of that. So here's an example. I brought a cheat sheet with me on that. As a matter of fact, I knew I wouldn't remember all these numbers, but I was just looking at some of the
Now, Rich,
homes.
we don't allow cheat sheets here in the podcast.
Oh man, I got so many numbers on this page, and they're like 4 points. I couldn't remember all of these if I had the memory of Einstein.
Wow. Now, are these numbers relative to housing?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Lay them on us. What do you got there?
Well, just to give you
What are
some
your thoughts?
background,
Yeah.
Here's my thought. Here's the thing. When my wife and I first moved here 5.5 years ago, we were renting our house. So we lived just a little bit south of Rebecca, in that area, kind of between Cat Claw and Buffalo Gap Road, just south of Rebecca, a little triangular area. And we rented our house. So you can visualize the area. It's single-story brick, ranch-style homes, varying from about 1,650 square feet up to about 2,400, and our house is about 2,200. And we were renting for $1,500 a month. We went on to buy the house, luckily, because we were able to purchase it. And so I started looking for equivalent rents right now in our area, in that particular neighborhood. And I pulled this sheet up, and there is a house right now that is renting for, I believe, $6,000. I didn't bring my bifocals with me, so I must have dropped these down like here to actually see it. But yeah, there's a house renting for $6,000. Well, they're actually asking $6,000 for it, and it is a little bit smaller than ours, about 1,700 square feet.
So to clarify, about 5 or so years ago, $1,500 a month. Now $6,000 a month.
Now $6,000.
Okay. Now, to a guy like me, I don't know, but I'm going to use a pejorative word that somebody probably wouldn't want to hear. But to me, that almost sounds like gouging, price gouging, right?
Well, if you take a look at a supply and demand curve, when you have that many residents put into an area all at once, and you don't have an actual number for this. And a year ago, I don't know how many units were available in Abilene, maybe 600, 800 available vacancies throughout the whole city. I don't know, maybe 400, 900, but definitely not 6,000. So when you put that type of demand and supply is pretty much the same, prices are just going to skyrocket. I mean, whether it's price gouging or not, it's just going to go through the roof.
So again, I don't know. It just seems to me a little bit of planning could have been helpful. I mean, couldn't we have said, okay, look, Mr. Data Center, you're coming to town. We need to plan for this, and we need to, if we're giving these massive tax abatements to major infrastructure things like the data center, maybe we need to somehow also incentivize more building, and specifically building for middle and lower income. Because it looks like to me what's building in Abilene are really expensive places. Am I way out of line or kind of nutty there?
What I see is two areas. I see some expensive places being built, but we also have the temporary housing, the RV parks that are just kind of expanding like crazy, which for temporary workers is actually not that bad of an idea. I mean, because they're going to be there, then the units are going to go, when the construction jobs go away 3 or 4 years from now, those mobile units are going to go someplace else to where the next demand is. So that actually makes a decent amount of sense. But what I see is those kind of two at the opposite ends of the extreme. I don't see an awful lot in the center. I don't see a lot of homes that are like the size of ours that are in the 200 to 300,000 range being built.
But what about a company that hires a young professional fresh out of, let's say, Texas Tech, and they move to Abilene, they're getting paid, $37K a year. Where are they going to live?
Probably in an RV park at the moment, because that's the price of the housing right now. I mean, there are some apartments. I looked at some. There's some 2 bedrooms, maybe not in the greatest shape apartments, but $1,000, $1,100 a month. So there is some stuff available. But getting back to your original question about the planning part, yeah, I definitely could have put some additional planning into this. And I don't know exactly what the planning was, but I do know this. I've got some experience in this from. I used to work for the Governor's Office of Economic Development out in the state of Nevada, And I was there when they brought in the mega factory for Tesla up in Reno, just outside of Reno in Story County, Nevada. And that was a construction project that peaked at around 18,000 construction workers at the time. And there was about a 2 to 2.5 year planning period that went into that so they could mitigate things like, so the rents didn't go runaway in the Reno Sparks area.
Who did that planning?
It was, well, what they did is it was the Governor's Office of Economic Development. And what they did is they actually did an economic impact study, and they actually got a company out of here in Texas to do it. I'm trying to remember the name of it, Applied Economics. They were out of either the Metroplex or Austin, I don't remember. But they had that company come in and do a full economic analysis, and then they went through and they vetted it with their team, and they asked questions. They went back and forth. And
Well, do you think somebody did that for us, or should somebody have done that for us?
I don't know. I have not looked at I haven't been able to find any documentation in a long time. I don't know if they did it as an internal study or if they did a third party, but I haven't been able to find any information or documentation on that.
Because it just seems to me, just watching it, look, for the sake of transparency, my wife and I actually have a small little apartment we rent out for short-term rentals.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy. We get requests on a weekly basis. Somebody wants to rent it for 6 months, and our little place just isn't suited for that.
Mm-hmm.
But it just shows you, and kind of anecdotal evidence, just shows you what we're talking about. The demand is so great. And I think if we wanted to, we could jump in the price gouging deal. It's not something we
Glad
do.
you're not.
Yeah, no, we don't. And so we've tried to keep our prices where they were 2 or 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. It just seems to me, just watching all that to say, it just seems to me from my perspective, we have not had a robust, transparent, open communication, conversation of planning for all of this. It's just boom, here we are. And man, a lot of it's upside and good news. Man, it's fantastic. Yeah, it's a lot of it is. Mm-hmm. But boy, a lot of it too is not just the housing impact, but what the belly trucks full of gravel are doing to our roads.
Well, there's a couple issues there with the roads too. You have the heavy equipment on farm to market roads in some areas, and they're not really built to take that type of pounding. The other thing is you've got on any given day probably between 4,000 and 5,000 individual vehicles going out there to try to get on site to work. There's ways you can mitigate that.
That's a lot of wear and tear. Okay, what ways can you mitigate that?
Well, one way you can mitigate that is if in the planning stages, if you have, let's say so imagine like a tour bus, a 50, 60 passenger bus. You have designated pickup locations, and some of those pickup locations could be, the decent sized RV parks. Those buses come there, they actually pick the workers up, they take them in. So, and not everybody's going to use them, of course. Some people are still going to drive themselves, or they miss the bus, they're a little bit late, they're going to have to drive. But instead of 5,000, let's say each bus carries 50 people. I mean, in 100 of those buses, you can get 5,000 people out there if I'm doing the math right. 100 buses on the road compared to 5,000 vehicles, that's an awful lot less wear and tear.
Yeah, something like that. Who pays for something like that?
Well, that's what you do as part of the negotiation in the beginning. That's something where it's either a partnership between the government entity and the new businesses coming in to build. That's something that you would have them, for the most part, you'd want them to pay for. You'd want them to take care of that, and they can do it themselves internally. They can go to a third party and do that. However, it winds up being the most cost-effective for them because they're a business, so they're going to do the most cost-effective thing for them. But it also winds up being the cost-effective thing for the wear and tear of the infrastructure in the local community.
Generally speaking, just the 10,000-foot view, are you positive and pro data centers, or are you, I'm not so sure about the data centers?
What I am a strong proponent of negotiating from a position of strength. So let's give you the scenario. I'm a large company, and I come in and I want to build a data center here in this part of Texas. And the reason I want to build here is because compared to Orange County, California, or Manhattan Island in New York, land is very inexpensive here. So if I want to put something that's a square mile size of facility, I can do it here for much less, a lower cost of acquisition of land than I can in a lot of other places in the country.
To clarify, you're saying land acquisition cost is one of the driving factors of the location of the data centers being built here.
I would imagine so, because if I'm putting a facility that's a square mile in size, that's 640 acres, I believe, and that's a lot of acres. So it can be expensive if it's in some place like the edge of Chicago suburbs or something. It's going to be pricey. So I think what we need to do is we need to find a way to negotiate from a position of strength. And right now, so as a large company coming in, I can come to the city of Abilene and I can say, okay, well, this is what I want. These are the concessions I want. And if you won't give them to me, I'm going to go to Coleman, Winters, Haskell, wherever. I can go and I can give them the same deal. I can get that from them. I can get those concessions. So I can play certain entities off one another, local governmental entities off one another. The way to negotiate, I believe, from a position of strength is you get together through some of the regional organizations like the Council of Regional Governments here in Abilene and SPAG, for example, up in Texas, the South Plains Association of Governments. You get all the municipalities kind of together and you decide on a minimum level of concessions that you're going to be willing to give and negotiate to a company. That way they can't play you against one another to get you down to almost nothing. What they have to do is they have to start negotiating from a higher level than they would start negotiating with you from originally. So it makes, so here's an example, just in absolute numbers. I believe the data center has an 85% tax abatement. Well, maybe, I don't know what this right number is, but maybe the most you'd go is a 50% or a 40% tax abatement. So that company, when they're coming in to negotiate, if they want to acquire land and get those same type of abatements anywhere in this general area, they know that they're starting at that point to negotiate. They're not starting at 100% or 95% abatement, hoping to get 85. They're starting at about 40 or 50, hoping to get about 30. And that makes a big difference, especially for all the cities here, not just Abilene, but all the ones that are around this whole area in the big country.
Do you think that all of this is going to end up with higher tax values for citizens like you and me?
I think that remains to be seen. That's definitely a possibility because there's going to be certain services I believe that data center is going to need. And for example, let's say, and God forbid it ever happened, we're in an area that has a lot of wildfires. And, you get something gets going and it hits that particular area out there, and maybe those buildings are in danger, and one of them, something happens. And you have a firefight. I don't know if the city of Abilene has the equipment to fight something like that on that scale. It's going to require investment in order to be able to fight something on that scale, should it ever happen. The city's going to have to invest in probably larger pumpers, larger ladder trucks, a whole bunch of other equipment that it may not have already. And that's going to be paid for somewhere.
If the data center is getting an 85% tax abatement, who's going to pay for that? The data center or the citizens like you and me?
Well, if there's enough in that 15% that they're still paying, then potentially they could pay for it. If not, then the excess is going to be paid by the existing taxpayer base.
And sometimes questions can come across as, inherently negative. Travis and I had a beautiful tour of the data center, the Abilene data center, and interviewed the folks from there. Just really, frankly, a delightful time. I'm actually a fan. I just don't know. It sounds like to me a lot of the conversation we're having is, well, at the time, position of strength kind of negotiating would have been handy, but that ship has sailed. We're down the road.
On that project has sailed, but there's going to be other projects coming through. So what we need to do is make sure moving forward in the future that we're in that position of strength. We don't want to be in a position of weakness when you're negotiating on this from here on out.
We'll draw it to conclusion pretty quick here, Rich, but I would be remiss if today, when we're having this conversation, and here's a gentleman that wants to run for city council, I didn't ask you about something that's happening a long way away from here, but is all about municipal. Well, let's just get to it. What's happening in Minneapolis, and the ICE has shot somebody. I mean, it's just. Regardless of how your political view is, it's just a tragedy. It's horrible. It's just unthinkable. I guess my question to you is, as it relates to Abilene, is what do you think the biggest concerns for safety in Abilene are? Do you think that we could ever have that kind of civil unrest, municipal unrest here in our city?
Well, what I think is that there's no place in the entire country that would ever be immune from that. It could happen any place. There are situations that are more volatile than others. Minneapolis right now is quite volatile because we have a fairly large population. I don't know what the exact population of Minneapolis-St. Paul is. I'm going to say maybe 4 million.
Yeah, I would assume a few million.
Yeah, somewhere in that range. So you have a very large population. You have two people that are very much encamped in one side or the other. very strong in their opinions about it, and people on the streets. And then you have really a super unfortunate incident that has happened, and angers are flaring. I hope cooler heads prevail. What I don't see is there's one big difference. I don't see a presence of ICE officers in Abilene, Texas, nor do I see a presence of ICE officers in Abilene, Texas anywhere in the near future. So the dynamics between the two cities are very different. So whereas no place is immune, I think the likelihood of it happening here is very, very slim. So there's other places that it's, like Los Angeles or even New York, a larger city. You've got a lot more propensity for that. You've got a better chance of that happening, but I don't see that happening here.
Do you not see it happening here, Rich, because we don't have immigrants here who have not completed their paperwork and are illegal? We don't have any of that? Or do you think it's not happening here because we're in a red state?
I don't know. I don't know that. I don't know what the number of undocumented workers are here in Abilene. I have no idea. It could be 1/10 of 1%. It could be 8%. I don't know. So I don't have the information to really give you a great answer on that. If it would be, because there's a whole lot of what people would call quote unquote blue states that aren't having that issue either. You're not. Well, actually, let's take one that's I think almost everybody would agree would be a very blue state, Vermont. Vermont, to my knowledge, has never had a major ICE incident, because I don't subscribe to the local news in Burlington or Rutland either. So I think a lot of it has to do with, I think it just has to do with where you have the deployments right now, and there's volatility. So if you don't have them, you don't have them, so I don't know if it has as much to do with blue versus red as it has to do with urban versus rural.
Fair enough. And last question, do you think Abilene is managing its growth? Because growth is happening. Growth is here.
It definitely is.
Do you think we're managing that growth well? Just generally speaking, do you think we can improve? Do you think we're doing a good job?
Well, one of the things in my organization is I always look for continual improvement. I say, we may be hitting at 98% of the mark, but why not hit 99? So there's always room for improvement. And I think there's an opportunity right now, too, because right now we've got this housing crunch. And over the next few years, the Army Corps of Engineers is going to be coming in and spending about, the projections is about $1.6 billion to build infrastructure at Dias for the new the bombers that are coming in. And so in terms of federal projections, that means probably more like $2 billion because it will expand over time. Inflation will hit. So we have an opportunity. There's going to be, I've heard, anywhere from 4,500 to 6,500 new servicemen and women coming in, along with their families, along with some civilians as well. So off the top of my head, and the best estimate, this city over the next 5 to 7 years, just from Dias, is probably going to grow 20 to 30,000 people. We can start planning for that right now. And if
are we planning for that right now?
And not well, a little bit. I see some new housing going up over close to Dias. I see some duplexes being built. I see off of 14th Street where it connects.
Is that planned development or just private development?
I don't know. Okay. I don't know if that's planned or not, or if it's someone taking the initiative and doing that. Yeah. So there's some building going on for that right now, but we could take a comprehensive planning approach to that and actually look at that. And try to get the housing infrastructure in place. And the thing is, not all those folks are going to hit at one time, so it can be done incrementally. So you shouldn't have a surge where it causes the housing market to plummet because you're putting too much supply in. But you're not going to have a surge in people being stationed here at some point that's going to cause it to spike because you could get flat-footed because you weren't building fast enough. So if you can marry those two up with supply and demand, you can do a couple things. You can put a little bit more supply in right now, and that will help alleviate some of the pressures that we have right now for the construction workers at the data centers. And then as they leave, there's going to be people coming in for Dias, and they will come in and take up those homes and apartments and those dwellings, those units. And so you can kind of solve a short-term problem right now and also solve planning for a long-term issue down the road. So.
Rich Lyles, thank you, sir. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
And we'll see what happens when you file and see what happens in May at the municipal election. Big shout out to Travis Corrigan, our age producer here on Abilene People. I'm your host, Danny Sims, and we will see you next time. Thank you for joining us.